Hello and welcome to Spinster's Library. I'm Claudia and today I want to talk about how to find out your reading tastes in 5 easy steps. A bit of background, bit of story time. I spent quite a lot of my late teens and early adulthood rereading the same dozen books. Genuinely, I was always a reader, but for quite a few years I only read the same few books over and over and over again until I knew them by heart, and I just didn't branch out into any new books. Why was that? Well, because every time I did branch out, I hated what I was reading. So I just thought that new books weren't for me. You know how your musical taste sometimes just gets stuck at the age of 15? I thought the same thing was true for my reading taste, and that's why I just stuck to the same books, and I'd never bought or read any new books. Then a few years ago, to be precise, in the year of 2016, I joined Goodreads. I made a Goodreads account. I finally caught up with the whole social media thing. I got myself a Facebook, I got myself a Twitter, and I joined Goodreads. And that kind of got me into reading more new books. And I hated them. The reason why I couldn't get on with the new books that I was picking up and reading was because I didn't realize what my reading tastes actually were. And I'm pretty sure I'm not the only one. I have a feeling that that is a fairly common thing. So last year I made it a bit of a mission to really figure out what I like in a book. Part of that mission was talking about my reading on YouTube. I mean, that helps enormously, but I kind of went about it in a more systematic way. And today I will present to you my results in the form of an easy guide that you can follow along if you want to. The first step is to track your reading. And there are different ways of going about it. You can, as I've mentioned before, make an account on Goodreads and then rate all of the books that you read. Or you can write a little review about every single book that you read, just so you have a record for yourself. Other ways that you can record your reading include creating a BookTube account, talking to a camera like what I'm doing right now. You could create a Bookstagram account, where you take a nice little picture of the book that you've read and then give your opinion on it. Or you could, for example, you could create a book Twitter where you do the same thing but in tweets. A much more old school way of recording your reading is, of course, to just have a simple journal. You could have a paper journal or you could have a digital journal on your computer. And that way you don't have to share your opinion with anyone but yourself, and you can just write down your thoughts on a book after you've finished it. In any of those methods, you have the choice of using a rating system or not. And I would recommend starting with a rating system. A lot of people end up not using rating systems because their feelings on books are a lot more complicated than giving it 1 to 5 stars or 1 to 10 points. And of course, that's true. I mean, my feelings on books are a lot more complicated than that. But a rating system has the benefit of being a very obvious mathematical way of figuring out how much you liked a book. Because you can't capture statistical information without these numbers. My nerdy brain would always tend towards going for a rating system. Once you have tracked your reading for a while, we can get to step 2, which is to look back at your reading log and then pick out the books that you liked a lot and the books that you didn't like at all, as well as figuring out how much you like your reading in general. Now, I looked back at my Goodreads records from 2017 and 2018. I said I joined Goodreads in 2016, but I didn't really keep up with it a lot, so I don't think that's very reliable. So I counted up all of the ratings for new books that I read in 2017 and 2018, disregarding rereads, because obviously rereads are books that I picked because I knew I already liked them. Across all of the new books that I read in 2017, my average rating was 3.1 stars. And there was only a single 5-star read in 2017, which was, by the way, I Capture the Castle by Dodie Smith. That's not a great reading year, is it? Even though I read a good number of books, a lot of them I wasn't all that impressed with. 3.1 stars. It's okay. I mean, I didn't hate the majority of the books, but I clearly didn't love them either. In 2018, however, there is a big improvement. My average in 2018 was 3.6 stars, and there were 6 books that I gave 5 stars to. So that's quite a big jump. Once you've established those statistics for your own reading, you need to figure out what you like about the books that you loved and what you disliked about the books that you hated. So in step 3, let's go through some criteria that you can go through for books that you loved and books that you hated. Think about the following metrics, for lack of a better word: genre, perspective, characterization, setting, pace, tension, specific characteristics of main characters. Let's take my most recent 5-star read as an example. My most recent 5-star read is 1984 by George Orwell, which I just finished in April. So I'm going to go through that list again and tell you what I can figure out about my reading tastes just from that one 5-star read. The genre is dystopian fiction, and that's a really easy one for me. I like dystopian fiction, but you can have a look at your recent 5-star reads and figure out, are they mostly detective fiction? Are they mostly historical romance? Are they mostly scientific non-fiction? Writing style. That term's a little bit more wishy-washy. What I mean by that is the book written in a very straightforward or in a very descriptive manner? Is it told from a first or a third person perspective? And 1984 is a little bit of all of these things, because parts of 1984 are actually written in diary form, and then other parts of it are written in a limited third person narrative voice, and then parts of it are written in an omniscient third person narrative voice. So that doesn't actually tell me a whole lot about my preferences in terms of style. But what I can tell about the writing style from 1984 is that I like my prose to be quite masterfully crafted. George Orwell's writing is at an incredibly high level, even compared to other mid-century fiction that I've read. And I enjoy beautiful sentences and well-written paragraphs, and just a very appealing prose is quite important to me. Main characters. So the main character in 1984 is a middle-aged white man. What does that say about me? I think it says that I personally don't need to identify with the main character. I don't have to tick the same boxes as the main character. And that's something that's worth knowing about yourself. Do you enjoy books more when they are written about people like you? And I can tell you, I couldn't read book after book after book about middle-aged white men, so I definitely need a bit of variety in that as well. Setting. 1984 is set in a alternative future, although from now past, Britain. And I have realized that when it comes to settings, I do prefer books that are set in surroundings that I'm somewhat familiar with. But with a twist. I enjoy spotting the differences between the setting in the book and the setting that I'm familiar with. Because obviously the London of 1984 is not the same as the London of today. Similarly, I love historical fiction when I know the place at least somewhat, and when I can be aware of the changes that have happened between the setting in the book and the setting that I'm familiar with. And I know that's a little bit close-minded. The reason people read is to discover new places and discover new settings, but maybe that's just one thing where my comfort zone is very much geographically limited. What about the pace? Well, 1984 is a medium-sized book with really not that much of a quick plot. A lot of the tension in 1984 comes from what might happen, or what's happening behind the scene, what's happening hidden away in the dark, but not much actually happens on a chapter-by-chapter basis. Things start moving really fast in the last quarter of the book, in the last part of the book, but before then, everything's very, very slow-moving, and it's more about the moment than about action and movements. So look at the books that you like and figure out, are they fast-paced or slow-paced? Because that is a really big indicator for me about whether I'm going to enjoy a book or not. And there are many books that I've read where I would have really enjoyed them if they hadn't been so damn fast. I just get bored of action sequences, honestly. Oh, I forgot to talk about publication year. That's also another one that I find quite important because I like to read a lot of old books. So I realized I really like mid-century fiction from the 40s to the 60s in particular. And I also really like early 19th century and late 19th century fiction. You might find out that you mostly like contemporary novels. You might find out that you only really enjoy books when they're brand new. So definitely look at publication year as well. So this was just one example of me analysing a recent 5-star reads, but you can look at some of your favourite books from the last few years even and try and analyse them in a similar way. Just going through the book criteria by criteria and really picking out what it is that you loved about that book. Then do the same thing with a book you disliked. And I'm not going to go through the same list again, but it also helps to figure out if the books you disliked had specific characteristics that you disliked. Then the next step, I think this is step 5. Once you've done all of that, you should have a pretty good idea of what you like and what you dislike. The last step is how to use this knowledge correctly, because you don't want to just limit yourself to mid-century dystopian fiction about white middle-aged men just because you liked a few books that were like that. You might want to use that list to branch out into genres and categories and types of books that are less familiar to you. So for example, I am really not very familiar with contemporary young adult trilogies. I don't read much contemporary fiction. I don't read much that was published in the last 5 years, say. I don't read many series at all. Most of the books that I read are standalone books. I don't read much that's published for the young adult market at the moment either. So if I wanted to branch out into contemporary trilogies published for the young adult market, then I would pick some criteria that I know I like and I would apply that to them. So I would probably look for one of the genres I enjoy, like for example dystopian fiction. And I would find a book that seems, again, it's hard to tell from the blurb, that seems like it's quite slow paced because I know that that's what I like. And I might try and find a book that is set in a place that I'm already familiar with. And that way I can just put a little toe over the line and branch out outside of my comfort zone without being completely lost. So you want to mix the familiar and the comfortably familiar with the new and unknown, and that will give you a really good chance of finding new books that you love, but that aren't all the same. I'm really interested to hear what criteria you like about books, whether you have analysed your reading in a similar way as I have, and what conclusions you have come to. Comment down below and tell me what you have found out about yourself recently. Thank you very much for watching. Bye!